Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
About institutional racism, I know you pointed out that there are individual instances of racism.
Yes.
But I definitely do believe that there is institutional racism. And the reason why I say that is because when you look at what the FBI released in 2006, where they said that white supremacists were invading the police departments, or when James Comey essentially said that there is a history of minorities being targeted by the police, and he says our history with minorities is not pretty. And then you also look at Supreme Court rulings where they say that certain governments, state governments in the United States are literally with surgical precision trying to limit the African American and minority vote. It begs the question, like, how can you say there's no institutional racism when these institutions themselves are confessing that we're doing these things? And yes, they're being checked at times, but these things are happening. So
okay, there are a couple separate questions there because there are specific data points that you're mentioning there. You know, the 2006 FBI report, and then you're mentioning also the Supreme Court decisions on the Voting Rights Act and the rewriting of the Voting Rights Act. So as far as the Voting Rights Act goes, there is not a lot of evidence to suggest that black votes are being undercounted in southern states. It's just the evidence is very scanty there. Justice Scalia's, I think he wrote dissent in that case. Actually, it would have been the majority opinion in that case because they struck down the VRA. Is pretty telling and has a lot of countervailing data on that, so it's worth reading. As far as the idea of institutional racism, so here's my general view about institutional racism. When I say that there are individuals inside, I'm not saying individuals don't exist inside departments. I'm sure that there are some cops who are racist. Yeah. The question is, how do we fight? How do we fight racism? When we say institutional racism, the problem is there's no way for me to fight that with you because it's too vague. Yeah. So if you say a particular institution is racist and then demonstrate to me the evidence that the institution is racist, not that it's badly policed, not that it's incompetent because there are police departments that are incompetent, but that there's actual motivated racism there, then we can do something about it and I'll stand right alongside you. But my problem is that when people say institutional racism, it seems to me a broad rubric under which they can subsume all complaints about American society or the cops. So you'll have situations where a black guy gets shot by the cops, and the first reaction is not, was the cop incompetent? It was the cop had to be racist because there's a white cop and a black guy. Right? And so what you've seen is the DOJ in some cases, like for example, Seattle Police Department, they'll say that there's institutional bias there, but then they'll provide no actual evidence of institutional bias. They'll just say a disproportionate number of black people were imprisoned or arrested by the police department. Well, is it possible that a disproportionate number of black people were criminals in Seattle? Sure. I mean, that's actually what they found in 1994. They thought that there was institutional racism at the Highway Patrol in New Jersey. There's a federal case about it. And what they ended up finding, they did a study that they then tried to quash. And what the study found is that they were actually under-profiling black people, that there were just more black people speeding in New Jersey. So the point that I guess I'm making here is that I like when it's great that you're coming up and citing individual instances of data, and I want to look at each of those instances of data. I don't want to say that there's broad institutional racism in the United States because you have to name to me the exact institution. And you have to name to me how it's spread throughout that institution, and it isn't just individuals within that institution, and then we can change it. Okay, so that's an institution that has racism. That's not the same thing as arguing there's institutional racism in the United States as a general rule, because that suggests that America is generally racist, which is something with which I disagree.
Okay. So, yeah, I might agree with you that there are certain instances of America where it's not generally racist. But then in those cases where when we do discuss that racism in that institution, it's hard as a black person because you're then told that you cannot discuss this because you're calling out people. Like when you start talking about white supremacists in these organizations, not to say that all cops are white supremacists, but they are there. Like there are some that were invading, like you said.
Right, and if you find the cop who's a white supremacist, again, I'm willing to stand by you. The problem is when you make blanket statements like there are cops who are white supremacists. I'm willing to say there are, but the percentage matters here. I mean, are we talking about 70%, or are we talking about like one guy? Right, so and that I think is the big debate here, and so that's why whenever I have these conversations, I try to narrow it down to what's the most specific thing we can talk about that we can solve together. Because I promise you, I will go out there with you and protest against a racist shooting. Like when Walter Scott was shot in South Carolina, I'm on your side, right? I'm on the side of the person who was shot because that was a terrible shoot. Everybody saw that was a terrible shoot. But when people say that what happened in Ferguson, Missouri with Michael Brown, when they say that it was hands up, don't shoot, that's white racism, there's no evidence of that whatsoever, and that was actually an attempt to get a cop on the basis of really bad evidence. Okay. So I think that it's incumbent on us to actually show our work. Okay. Instead of just saying institutional racism, let's go out and protest, let's find the specific instance, and then we can solve it. Then we can solve the problem together.
Okay. Last question.
Yeah, sure.
So essentially, yeah, because just to add on to that, like, so I do agree, but then oftentimes when we start protesting, when we start doing all these things, there is this general fear that there is this conversation where it's already looked at as and we're delegitimized because they say, okay, African Americans are just going crazy, black people are just going crazy, and all these things, and it's hard to have dialogue and
I mean,
conversation
if that happens, that's wrong.
Yeah.
I think that it depends on the nature of the protest. So my problem with the Black Lives Matter movement, as a general matter, to take an example, is that when you say things like Black Lives Matter, the implication is not the one that like other lives don't matter so much as it is the suggestion that there are a bunch of people, a broad swath of people in America who don't care about black lives. That's the implication, and I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. I think that we all care about black lives, and I think that if the question were, what should we do about this particular shooting, that's one thing, but if the idea is that cops are shooting black people because black people are black people, I don't see any statistical evidence of a trend of that. So that's the problem with BLM. BLM tries to draw a trend from an anecdote. You want to protest the anecdote, I'll protest the anecdote with you. You want to protest the trend, you first have to identify to me statistically the trend exists.
Okay. So,
Great. Well, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I appreciate it.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just finish off with this. So yeah, so I agree with, okay, so on the Black Lives Matter trend, yes, we do need to look at cases individually, and yes, we do need to, because sometimes there is this effect where you want to call racist immediately, racism, and I agree with you, that's wrong. But I'm just saying that I feel like sometimes it becomes counterproductive when constantly when people are trying to defend these things, and people are trying to fight these things, and automatically the conversation is shaped in such a way that we're these far alt-right extremists or then we're far alt-left extremists trying to...
Right, and I think that the biggest problem when it comes to language, and I'll finish with this, I'm sorry, but
yeah.
I think that the biggest problem there is, as you notice, I keep trying to peg down as exactly as we can the instances that we're talking about and the language that we're referring to. And I think that movements have a hard time pegging that down. And you see that from movements all over the country. When you make a claim as broad as American society doesn't care about the lives of black people, Black Lives Matter, a lot of people are going to get pissed at that, and I think they have a right to be pissed at that.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks. North has a very flattering view of itself. I mean, if you look at actually living patterns and where demographics live, the fact is like Boston, significantly more segregated than most parts of Mississippi. But sorry, go ahead. So your question was?
My question is that they were enslaved and they're still...
Yes, of course. Still is the question. Right, so I've never denied, and I would never deny because it would be idiotic, that blacks have been historically discriminated against in America in an unbelievable way, from slavery to Jim Crow. Of course that's true. Jim Crow was ended in the 1960s. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Last time I checked the calendar, it's now 2016. So it's been quite a while, and the fact is that the poverty rate in the black community was alleviating much more quickly before the rise of the Great Society, during Jim Crow actually, than it has since then. To take another example, as I said, the single greatest indicator of intergenerational poverty is single motherhood. The increased rate of single motherhood is certainly not due to discrimination. And the proof of that is that during Jim Crow, the actual single motherhood rate in the black community was 20%. Today it's in excess of 70%. What happened? Are people more racist now than they were back in 1960? Of course not. So you have to look to other factors for why people are behaving the way they are. So are there people who still suffer the after effects of historic discrimination? I think sure. I mean, the fact that if you don't have wealth from your grandfather because your grandfather couldn't be wealthy because he was a sharecropper in Alabama, yeah, of course. But that goes back to the earlier question, which is what can government do? What is government capable of doing without violating somebody else's rights? And the answer is not very much, other than guarantee that I don't get in your way. And the beautiful thing about America now is that nobody gives a crap about you, nobody gives a crap about anybody, and that's actually a good thing. Like, I don't think that I don't spend my nights trying to determine how I can keep people down. And nobody really in America does very much. And because of that, as long as people are leaving you alone, in a free country, it's your obligation to make your way. Now, I think that there's a myth that goes around that people can make it from poverty to extreme wealth in a generation. That happens, it does. And the fact is that according to the statistics, if you're in the bottom 20% of income earners, 95% of the people in the bottom 20% of income earners will be outside the bottom 20% of income earners within 15 years, according to the IRS statistics. That said, it's, rising to wealth as a family unit, for example, usually takes multiple generations. I mean, most of our great-grandparents, when they came here, were dirt poor, and now most of the people in this room are probably not, right? And so the fact that there is a delay in that process for a lot of black folks is tragic and horrible, but it doesn't mean there's a shortcut, not in a free country. Yeah, it's okay, let her follow up.
So I'm just wondering, because there is the health of the woman that's taken into question, and she doesn't have the money to have proper health care or
Okay, so now you're adding more variables to the situation. But okay, so let's talk. Okay, so let's take each one of those variables at a time. But I'm going to have to cut off the continuing hypothetical after this before she ends up in penury at the end of Les Mis. But it's. Okay, the idea that what about the health of the mother? So my view on abortion, again, the morality of killing a baby does not change as long as the baby's not actually threatening the life of the mother. In the cases where the baby threatens the life of the mother, like for example, you have a case where a woman has actual breast cancer and she needs chemotherapy and she's pregnant, but the chemotherapy will abort the baby, which actually does happen, right? That is a case where the mother should, I think, be able to get the treatment. That's not the same thing as an abortion. So they're actually treating the mother for what she's got, and the byproduct of that is the baby is terminated, the baby's killed, basically. That's not the same thing morally. As far as, again, all I can say is restate that if this woman, there's about as sympathetic a case as you can make, and I personally would step in to try and help someone like that, and I have a feeling a lot of people in this room would step in to try and help somebody like that, but you're also, I do think that it's important to know two things. One, the solution to something horrible happening is not another horrible thing happening in the killing of a baby, which I think is actually horrible. And two, it's really not good to take the marginal case and then use that to argue broad. So what people tend to do is they say, well, what about the girl who's raped? What about her abortion case? So now let me ask you, if the girl weren't raped and she just got pregnant, would you think that she should still have access to an abortion? Right, so you're giving me an exceptional case. So you're giving me an exceptional case in order to prove a rule that you don't actually want to defend. So if you just come up and ask me, do I think a woman should have an abortion, then we could actually have an argument about, or a discussion about in what cases an abortion was appropriate. But you always, this is what people on the pro-choice side, the anti-life side, actually do. What they actually do is they take the marginal case, they take the raped, woman who has a severe disability, and they say, this is all abortions. That's not all abortions. Significantly less than 1% of all abortions are performed on women who have been raped. So if you want to talk about the epidemic of abortion in the country, over 1 million abortions performed a year in the United States, let's talk about the other 99% of cases. When you are willing to agree with me that the other 99% of cases are not cases where abortion should be necessary, then I'm willing to have a discussion with you about compromise. But I don't think that's what you want. I think that you're just using the exceptional case in order to try and guilt me into supporting a broad-based abortion platform. Let her ask the question. I want to hear the rest of the question. All right.
Or even if she didn't, she had access to birth control, she didn't use it, she got pregnant. How about she gets responsible? One time I'm getting interrupted by a man with white nails. That's okay.
Would it be better if they were all black? I'm just I'm confused.
It wouldn't be better. The point is you're overlooking the woman in the situation.
Well, guys, okay. I'm not overlooking the woman in the situation. She had many choices. Okay, so now you're shifting the scenario. Okay, so now just to be clear, are we talking about the scenario with the rape, or are we talking about the other one? Okay, because no, we're not going to do every scenario because all these scenarios are different, and I want to discuss them specifically. So if we're going to talk about, so if we're going to talk about the case where the woman is she doesn't have access to birth control, which is available at CVS for $32, you can get a bunch of condoms. Okay, it's really not expensive. If we're going to talk about the idea that a woman just was too lazy to use birth control, or she got pregnant because the birth control broke, I really do believe, well, I mean, since the woman is probably going to bear the burden of pregnancy, both of them might bear the burden. I mean, just actually speaking. Okay, the man has a lot less cost there. She does bear the physical burden. I mean, you're the one calling pregnancy a physical burden, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, but I'm wondering so you're saying that the man shouldn't have any responsibility?
No, I'm saying the man should marry her. You're the one saying the woman should stay single and then rely on the government. These are two separate issues. Sympathy for the woman and how about a little sympathy for the child? Okay, at any point does sympathy for the child come in here? You say I'm not compromising. I'm the only one in this conversation who's expressed the willingness to take money out of my own pocket and put it in somebody else's.
So have you donated to Planned Parenthood then?
What was that?
Have you donated to Planned Parenthood?
No, because they kill babies. They kill 300,000 unborn children a year. No, I don't donate to a baby genocidal organization like this. I'd love to continue it, but there's a big line behind him.
Hello, everyone. Hey, I'm just stopping by to remind you that liberals are insane. Social justice warriors are becoming more violent and triggered than ever before. Anyways, be sure to subscribe to KGP TV on YouTube and have a blessed day. Yeah, man.
So as far as the Voting Rights Act goes, there is not a lot of evidence to suggest that black votes are being undercounted in southern states. It's just the evidence is very scanty there. Justice Scalia's, I think he wrote dissent in that case. Actually, it would have been the majority opinion in that case because they struck down the VRA, is pretty telling and has a lot of countervailing data on that, so it's worth reading. As far as the idea of institutional racism, so here's my general view about institutional racism. When I say that there are individuals inside...
Rulings where they say that certain governments, state governments in the United States are literally, with surgical precision, trying to limit the African American and minority vote. It begs the question, like, how can you say there's no institutional racism when these institutions themselves are confessing that we're doing these things? And yes, they're being checked at times, but these things are happening. So
okay, there are a couple separate questions there because there are specific data points that you're mentioning there. You know, the 2006 FBI report, and then you're mentioning also the Supreme Court decisions on the Voting Rights Act and the rewriting of the Voting Rights Act. So.
Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door.
I'm not saying individuals don't exist inside departments. I'm sure that there are some cops who are racist.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we fight, how do we fight racism? When we say institutional racism, the problem is there's no way for me to fight that with you because it's too vague. Yeah. So if you say a particular institution is racist and then demonstrate to me the evidence that the institution is racist, not that it's badly policed, not that it's incompetent, because there are police departments that are incompetent, but that there's actual motivated racism.
In about 3 to 5 days, so that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
About institutional racism, I know you pointed out that there are individual instances of racism.
Yes.
But I definitely do believe that there is institutional racism. And the reason why I say that is because when you look at what the FBI released in 2006, where they said that white supremacists were invading the police departments, or when James Comey essentially said that there is a history of minorities being targeted by the police, and he says our history with minorities is not pretty. And then you also look at Supreme Court